Georgia wins a 51-44 shootout over Tennessee in a game that was equal parts Tennessee, Georgia 2006 and Tennessee, South Carolina 2011. But this time, unlike those other two games, Georgia figured out how to win, setting up what is a very big game in Columbia. Gamecocks struggling a little bit with Kentucky. Looks like they're going to win. But look, if Georgia play this week, they're going to lose the game to Carolina. If they play without any turnovers, they'll win. I mean, I think it's that basic. I think Georgia's better. And I just think, Aaron's got to respect the ball just a little bit more than he did, although sometimes when you get sacked and fumble, that's not always on you. The offensive line could protect slightly better, but, the offense scored 51 points tonight. They really scored about 71 points because 3 of the turnovers from Georgia directly led to Tennessee scoring 20 points. And, again, if they turn the ball over in Columbia, they'll lose. We'll see if that happens. Georgia 3 for 3 in the red zone. Mainly, though, the thing that sticks out is these running backs for Georgia. I don't know. I mean, Todd Gurley's the best running back, but Keith Marshall with 164 yards tonight. Keith, did I say that wrong? Keith Marshall with 164 yards tonight. Todd Gurley with 130, and it's easy to get them confused. I mean, they don't look the same, but they certainly have relatively the same effect. Keith Marshall with a ridiculous 16.4 yards a carry. Todd Gurley with a pretty ridiculous 5 yards a carry. So I think we're going to see next week in Columbia a lot of running. The question is South Carolina going to be able to throw the ball on Georgia? I mean, I thought tonight Georgia's defense didn't play the way it wanted to. Grantham said after the game a lot of the stuff was correctable. Obviously I think Todd knows what he's talking about. But, the two guys that were suspended tallied 23 total tackles. So that's a long, that's a lot of tackles. And the other thing, too, is Georgia's defense stood up in the fourth quarter. And they're going to have to do that against the Cox next week, too. Georgia, it's going to be tough playing in Columbia. It always is. Games are typically close. I don't expect Georgia to score more than 40 points against Carolina. We're 5 games in the season, and they have yet to score in the 30s. So I know South Carolina's defense is really good, and I get that. And I think Georgia's defense is really good. But this Georgia offense continues to roll, and I don't think they're going to get 500 yards against Carolina next week. I don't think they're going to score 50 points, but I think they're going to score 30. I think they'll definitely score 24. I would really be surprised if they don't, just because at this point, if you're not a believer, it's hard to just sort of make rational thought that these guys can't score pretty much every time they touch the ball. I mean, it's odd when Colin Barber runs out there. For the Vols, I just don't think the Vols are horrible. I think they're going to get somebody. I think they'll probably wind up in like the Peach Bowl or Outback or something like that. They're not the end of the world. They've lost a couple of tough games. They can beat South Carolina. I don't think they can beat Alabama, but they can beat Carolina, and then they can have a decent end of the year. I think they can beat State for sure, but. They figured out how to run on Georgia tonight, almost 200 yards, and they found it in the second quarter. But again, if Georgia's judicious with the ball, they respect the ball, they'll win the rest of the games they play this season. If they turn it over like they did tonight, they won't. And the question is this: was this the Aaron Murray, sort of bad night with turnovers? Was this Georgia's bad night with turnovers? If this was the bad night, then there's not much to be afraid of. But when you continuously turn the ball over, it's a problem. It should definitely be pointed out, however, that Georgia wound up with less turnovers than the Vols, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, Tennessee wound up with 4 turnovers, 3 interceptions, and 1 fumble lost. So, I mean, Georgia won the turnover battle and won a game, and yada, yada, yada. Look, the game against South Carolina is a huge game. Georgia needs to play well. They don't turn it over, they win. They turn it over and they don't, they're not +1 or they're 0 in the turnover margin. They definitely could lose that game, and they should really be disappointed if they do, because they're the better team. I wasn't comfortable saying that earlier in the season, but they are, and I think that I think they're clearly mentally tough. The question is, when they get to Columbia, and they're going to have that crowd, you know, it goes Clemson, Georgia, and it's, you know, they hate Georgia a lot. When they get there, they're going to have to realize they need to execute. Part of executing is holding on to the ball. Georgia does that, they win. They're going to have to, you know, they're going to have to fight it out and all that stuff. But if they do hold on to the ball, maybe the defense gets Carolina to turn it over, Georgia will win the game. Okay, so Georgia 51-44 winner over the Vols, 5-0, massive, probably the biggest game between Georgia and South Carolina, maybe in the history of the thing. In 1980, here in Athens was a pretty big game with Herschel Walker and George Rogers, 13-10 win for Georgia. But this one is a matchup of top 6 teams, and be a big contest for both schools. Georgia a victor tonight, 51-44.